Hey everyone, welcome back. I wanted to have a quick chat with you all about the Freedom Caucus, and more specifically some of the concessions that they extracted from Kevin McCarthy during the speakership election. And most of them are pretty straightforward, and they're just designed to give the Freedom Caucus an outsized influence in the Republican majority. Despite the fact that they only make up less than a quarter of the House Republican Conference, the Freedom Caucus and its allies have been able to get a bunch of key committee assignments, especially on the Rules Committee, which is important for determining what bills come up for a vote, how amendments are processed, and a whole bunch of issues that govern how the House of Representatives operates. This is really important for giving them a bit more control over the House and what kind of policies it might push forward. However, there were also some concessions that I didn't quite understand, which mostly revolved around bringing certain bills forward for a full vote on the House floor. One of those bills has been in the news a lot recently, which is the Fair Tax Act. It's a very weird piece of legislation, and I'm not going to go into it in depth here, but if you guys want to hear about that, leave me a comment. The point of it, though, is that it is incredibly unpopular, and even Kevin McCarthy has said that he is opposed to it and has tried to push it off into committee so that it doesn't actually have to have the vote that he promised. So I guess my question was initially, why would the Freedom Caucus waste their political capital when they're in a fairly good bargaining position to force floor votes on unpopular pieces of legislation that probably can't even pass the House, let alone pass the Senate and then be signed into law by President Biden? And the more I thought about it, the more that I realized that this isn't actually about passing that legislation right now. I think that the Freedom Caucus might actually have a pretty decent strategy to change their numbers from less than 25% to eventually become the majority of the GOP. So, how does forcing votes on unpopular pieces of legislation help the Freedom Caucus? Well, as I see it, this is a two-phase plan. Phase 1 focuses on the actual vote itself. While the bills are being debated and voted on, they have a lot of opportunities to get out on various conservative media networks and put out their views. Additionally, it also gives them a wonderful opportunity to fundraise. And that combination of messaging opportunities and fundraising opportunities really helps push out the idea that they represent a larger portion of the Republican Party than they actually do, as these bills are kind of their baby, so they're the ones who are going to be able to go out there and speak most passionately about them. The second part of Phase 1 is that it forces every member of the GOP to go on record on how they're voting on these pieces of legislation, which, granted, they're not very popular with the broader electorate, but they are very popular with certain segments of the Republican base, especially some sections of the far right. Then there's Phase 2, which focuses on primary elections. The idea being to use the publicity, fundraising, and on-the-record votes from Phase 1 in order to target Republican representatives that have opposed the Freedom Caucus in the past and replace them with new candidates that are more closely aligned with the Freedom Caucus's policy agenda. For example, let's say we have Republican Representative John Doe, and he votes against the Fair Tax Act for whatever reason, because he thinks it's a bad piece of legislation. Doesn't really matter. However, when it comes to his primary, well, the base of his electorate, the people who are going to vote in that primary, they've heard all the good things this bill would have done for them had it passed. So, they might be a little bit annoyed, but, that was in the past. But, since they have his vote on record, and they've raised all this money, the Freedom Caucus can afford to intervene in this primary, spend money on ads, and remind the voters that, hey, Representative John Doe didn't vote how you wanted him to on the Fair Tax Act. You should replace him with Representative John Smith. He's our man. He would have voted for it, and in the future he'll help us achieve what we want to do. And they'd probably go on to call Representative John Doe a rhino, a few other things. Traditional Republican primary stuff. But we know that this is effective. A lot of Republicans currently in the House are in safe districts where they don't have to worry necessarily about a Democratic challenger, but they are always looking over their shoulder to see if there is a further right candidate looking to challenge them in the primary. It's actually how the Freedom Caucus got started back in 2010 with the Tea Party movement, and how they've been able to grow their ranks ever so slowly over the past couple of years. This strategy pairs nicely with the fact that the Freedom Caucus also got Kevin McCarthy to agree that the House leadership PAC wouldn't intervene in Republican primaries, especially those without an incumbent. This gives a serious financial advantage to any candidate that's backed by the Freedom Caucus, as They just have access to another source of fundraising that any other candidate that doesn't have that Freedom Caucus support doesn't have access to, because Kevin McCarthy has agreed to step back. And especially in primaries, the ability for a candidate to spend money on ads and other ways to get their message out there is really critical to winning those elections. So, again, another concession that seems geared towards making the Freedom Caucus much more influential in the Republican primary system. Obviously, this plan relies on Kevin McCarthy actually keeping his promises, and given how he's treating the Fair Tax Act, he doesn't seem too inclined to actually keep those promises if he doesn't believe it's politically in his interest. So, there might be a bit of a problem for the Freedom Caucus strategy, but there is a bit of a backup plan. They can always use the fact that it only takes one person to start a motion to vacate the Speaker as a proxy for their vote on whatever the bill is. We can say, hey Kevin, you're not bringing our bill up for a vote. We don't like that. We're going to vote to kick you out. They don't have the votes to kick him out, but they can send out their emails for fundraising and do their publicity tours on conservative media, essentially saying, hey, we're trying to kick Kevin out because of all these things, and then essentially gain the same votes. And they can also use the fact that members will have to vote whether to remove Kevin McCarthy or not as a proxy for their votes on the bills. It's not perfect, and it's probably not as straightforward as a way to appeal to voters, but in a pinch, it will do. Obviously, the other big issue is that after the primary election comes the general election, and as we saw in 2022, what appeals to the base is not always what appeals to the general electorate. Now, the GOP only has a 4-seat majority as it is, and they are very likely to lose the seat currently held by Representative Santos due to all of his antics, so they really don't have a lot of margin for error. If there's an upset in an otherwise safe Republican district, or a candidate that is too extreme wins the primary in a swing district, Republicans could easily lose their majority in 2024. However, that might be a small price to pay for the Freedom Caucus in order to ensure that they become the majority of the Republican Party. Think about it. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more of my content, subscribe to the channel and make sure to hit the bell icon so that you get notified whenever I post new videos. If you want to support me on my other social media platforms, all of the links you need will be in the video description below. If you have any questions about this video or another topic that you'd like me to discuss, leave me a comment and I'll do my best to get you an answer. Thanks again for watching, and have a great day.